In the name of our living and loving God who creates us, redeems us and sustains us. Amen. Please sit down. Seems simple enough, doesn't it? Love one another as I have loved you, and by this the world will know. Should be simple. But obviously it can't be, because if it was that simple, then wars, hatred and division would have by now faded away. And when I last looked, they hadn't. So let's look more closely at the story itself to see why it's never been that easy or that simple. Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, has just gone out to betray Jesus. So, question to you. Does the love that the disciples are to have one for another extend to Judas? Horrible line from a hymn for the feast of St. Matthias last week, who replaced Judas, which described Judas as traitor unblessed. Traitor unblessed, causing me to say that sometimes hymns sound to me like heresy in rhyming verse. The attitude of the early church towards Judas seemed to be little better. When they come to choose Matthias, Peter introduces the process by referring to Judas having gone to the place appointed for him. Judas wandering in the darkness. Judas who betrayed. Judas who must have felt what? Let down? Deeply disappointed? Alienated? Alone? Does the forgiveness extend to Judas? Look at how Jesus treats Judas during the Last Supper. 3 things that Jesus does. First thing, of course, is to wash Judas's feet, like all the other disciples. Doesn't sound radical to us nowadays, but of course, to Jesus' contemporaries, you wouldn't have asked anybody to wash your dirty, filthy, dusty feet than a Gentile female slave, because it was such a humiliating thing to have to do. So Jesus has, during the Last Supper, knelt at the foot of Judas, who presumably he knows is about to betray him, and washed his feet. Second thing, where does he place Judas? It's hard to say, but if you look at the intimate discussions that go on during the Last Supper, discussions that the rest of the disciples aren't so aware of, on the right hand we think is the beloved disciple, John. Peter has a quiet word with John, so perhaps is sitting next to him. And when Jesus does the third thing of passing the morsel dipped in the dish to Judas, he must be close by, perhaps at his left hand. So I know it's conjecture, but if Judas is at the left hand of Jesus, then that's another place of honor. It's where you put someone you feel particularly close to you. And the morsel in the dish, that's the sign of honor as well. That's how the host of the feast would show particular favor in ancient Near Eastern culture, by soaking some of the bread in the sauce in the dish and passing it to someone especially favored. And of course, it's the sign of betrayal. But is it just me who wants to say, it seems to me that in everything that Jesus is doing with Judas during the Last Supper, the door is being left open. The possibilities to act in another way are being left clear. But for Judas, it's too late, and he goes out, and night has fallen. And then Jesus does that ridiculous-sounding thing of speaking about glory, knowing full well that as the door closes on Judas, the train of events has been set in motion that will lead to his death. And he speaks about glory. Why? Because of the next commandment that he gives, the new commandment. Why did we need a new commandment? We had the 10 commandments. Why a new commandment? Love one another as I have loved you. That's how you love one another. And the church and the world has been getting that wrong ever since. We're very good at loving one another when we're closely united in a group. When we identify with each other in our family or our tribe or our political party, we're very good at loving one another. And being very good at loving one another also makes it good not to love those who are outside our tribe, our family, our ethnicity, or our political party. And the church has been as guilty or more guilty of that than anybody else. We're good at loving those within and good at hating those without. Might even have extended to Judas in the early church. Traitor, unblessed. But what about the inner Judas? What about that bit of you that feels betrayed and let down? What about that bit of you that feels deeply disappointed in what life's not given you, in what life's taken away from you? Let's really say it. Disappointed and let down by God. What do you do with that bit? Do you banish it, deny it, refuse to own it? Or do you admit to it? Open the door. Because that's the way you stop being controlled by it. When you admit to the bits of you that are disappointed and alienated and let down. That's when admitting to it, you start to be able to stop it controlling you. The shadow side of all of us that we don't like to admit to. Acknowledging it, naming it, forgiving it is when it begins. Jesus says, love one another. As I have loved you, that's how you are to love one another. As I have loved you. So what does that look like? It's what the church has been struggling to understand and respond to and model. Because for him now, the time of speaking is about to come to an end, and the time of acting or being acted upon is about to draw closer. How does he love them? By leading them out to the Garden of Gethsemane, in pain and tears, acknowledging what is to be, and allowing himself to be handed over, lifted up on the cross, drawing the whole world to himself, pleading forgiveness for those who've done this to him. That's how they're to love one another. That's how they're to do it. Not just within the body of the disciples, but allowing the love to expand through forgiveness and self-giving, till it includes, as we heard in our reading from the Acts of the Apostles, even the hated Gentiles, they too within the body. And the process of modeling what it looks like to love as Jesus loved is something the church is still called to. And am I alone in looking around at the current fractured political and communal discourse of this country and thinking that surely it has to be the case that we need a bit more confidence about what we can model to a broken and divided society? A more politically fractured discourse than I've seen in my lifetime, where talks break down, and where you used to believe that when the hurly-burly of Prime Minister's Question Time was over, they quietly got on with working together behind the scenes. But does it look like that now? Not so much, in my opinion. So, brothers and sisters, that's what we have to give to our local communities. And I challenge you to think of one way this week in which you can model Jesus' simple new commandment. As I have loved you, you are to love one another. How can you do that in one simple, small way this week? What relationship might it be? And if you're not certain, let me speak to you about a local prophet whose words have continued to haunt me since I arrived in Bury. Barbara Gale, Chief Executive of St. Nicholas Hospice, known to many of you, I hope, who, when I went to visit her shortly after I arrived here and said, "What do you want to achieve? What's your vision?" My first question to people, she said, simple, to achieve a compassionate society. Was that all? Thought it might look like doubling the number of beds in her hospice or providing a sound financial basis, but no. To achieve a compassionate society. What would that look like, I said. She said it would mean that people could die at home, even if they had no family or friends around them, because they would know that in every community, every street, there existed a compassionate network who would deliver the lasagna, who would sit at the bedside, who would water the pots, who would do some shopping, who would take their turn. That's what a compassionate society looks like, she said, and that's what I need to try and achieve. So if you're wondering what you can do this week, it might look a bit like that. Allowing yourself to be poured out a bit, to love someone outside the framework of the familiar, the known, your culture, your grouping, your social network, your family. As I have loved you, he says, as he prepares to be lifted up, his arms pinned wide on the cross. As I have loved you, that's how you are to love one another. And that's what we have to give to our fractured, divided and polarized nation. And that should be enough to send you out from this place with renewed vigor and commitment.